lot of you guys who follow me on Instagram know that I'm a huge fan of lock mitering columns, especially whenever I'm doing a big volume of like 6 or so columns. I'll run all of my stiles through a shaper with a lock miter, and that works really well. And then there are no fasteners on the corners, which just really makes a much better finished product. However, sometimes you only have 1 or 2 columns to do. Sorry, it's fly season right now. And it's kind of unnecessary time to set up the shaper just for 1 or 2 columns. So I'm going to show you the approach that I use whenever I don't want to use the shaper. So what we're going to do is actually do what I call a miter folded column. A lot of you have probably seen a mitered fold whenever you do like a floating shelf or something like that. You use tape, you cut your angles at 45.5 degrees, glue them, and then fold it all together. Well, we're going to do the same thing with these columns. So what I've actually done is I've already got the 1x material assembled. I've got my rails done with glue and pocket screws. I ripped all of these long stiles. They're a little under 8 foot long. Ripped a 1x6 in half, run them all through the joiner to get a nice straight edge. Then I run them through the table, or then I run them, joiner. Then I'll rip them to a consistent width on the table saw, and then run them through the planer one time to take a 1/16 off. That way all my stiles are nice and straight. So then the next step is going to be to nail on my panel material, and for that I'm using 1/4 inch poplar, and I'm going to be stapling that on with a 22 gauge stapler with staples that are 5/8 inch long. So I buy the Grex staples off Amazon, 5/8 long, and then this is a 22 gauge stapler. This is a Porter cable, super cheap. I mean, like less than $100 I think. You could also get a Grex. There's some other brands, but I'll have this linked below. So next step is going to be to staple this stuff on, and then we'll run it through the table saw, and then I'll show you how to do the miter fold. Alright, so you'll see here I've got my stapler ready to go. I've got my stile and rail frame 1x put together face down, and then I've got the good side of my poplar 1/4 inch plywood face down. I'm going to set it down on there, and I rip this plywood to the exact width that my 1x frame is. And there's a reason for that. I'll show you in a second. I start off by tacking the ends, getting everything lined up where it should be. So I start off by tacking these ends, but you got to be careful because we're going to end up cutting these on the table saw at a 45 degree on the end, so I don't want to have staples out here. Otherwise I'll be cutting through all my staples. So I want to keep those staples real close to the center, as far as, not the center, but as far in as I can on these stiles without risking shooting a staple through my panel. So I'm going to take my double square and just mark 2 inches in. That way I can see on the back side here exactly where I'm trying to put these staples, and I don't inadvertently, shoot through my plywood or put a staple where I'm going to end up cutting through it with the table saw. Okay, so now the other reason that I rip these pieces of plywood to the exact width is because we all know how wood is, and a lot of times it doesn't want to stay straight. Well, I'll actually use my plywood, which is much more likely to be straight, as a guide. So as I staple these stiles, staple my plywood to these stiles, I'll actually make sure that everything is lining up flush on this outside edge, and then I'll know that my columns are going to be perfectly straight whenever I rip them. So this is a really handy technique if you're on the job site and you're actually making these on site and you don't have the luxury of a joiner to keep things nice and straight, you can utilize that plywood to straighten your stiles out if they've got a bow in them whenever you're stapling the plywood panel on the back. All right, so I'll go ahead and staple these home. Again, just using my fingers to make everything nice and flush. So I go along the stiles and then I'll find my rails where those are at. Just shoot a couple through there. Alright, so that panel is all done then, and it is ready to be ripped on the table saw. So I will do the other 7 here, and then I'll show you what I do on the table saw. Okay, so I just finished stapling this. Couple notes. Whenever I use this stapler, and I use it a ton, if you follow me on Instagram, you know how much I love this thing. About every 2 to 3 inches you want to staple. More is better. These staples may not seem like it, being just 22 gauge, but they hold incredibly well. But even so, being a paneled column with 1/4 inch like this, you want to make sure that it could handle, you know, taking a blow where the plywood actually isn't going to come loose. So I recommend more staples rather than less. I'll have this stapler linked up below in the notes. Highly recommend it. So another question a lot of people are probably going to have is, well, why don't you rip the 45 on your stiles before you assemble? And there's a lot of reasons. It's kind of just like one of those carpentry sixth sense type things where you just know something's going to yield a more crisp result doing it a certain way, and this is one of those times. Ripping these individually, then I have to deal with a sharp edge whenever I'm trying to assemble everything, more likely to be cutting myself, dinging the edge on things, and then also it's a lot more susceptible to the twist in the stile. You know, if that board isn't perfectly flat and I'm putting it through my table saw, it can throw that angle off a little bit and give me some issues. And I find that assembling the whole panel like this and then running it through, whenever you're running it through the table saw, it has a much wider frame of reference, and stapling this plywood on has just made everything a lot flatter and more cohesive. So that's why I do it. I just feel like it works a lot better doing it in that order. Getting the table saw set up, I like to go 45.5 degrees. What that does is it allows the corner, the very outside tip of the corner, to be the tight point, and then there will be a slight gap towards the inside or the heel of that cut. So then whenever you're doing your miter fold, what that's going to do is it's going to help any excess glue to be diverted towards the inside and not towards the outside. And then it's also going to make it a lot easier to run over that outside corner edge with like a nail set or whatever round object you've got to really make that corner perfectly crisp. So what I'm going to do here is I've got my Wixie digital gauge, put it on here, I hit the 0 button to get that zeroed in exactly, and then I go ahead and I just put that on my blade just to make sure I'm right at 45.5. It's just a little bit of extra insurance here. So I'll get that dialed in perfect right there, and then I can start sending these through. So at this point I just got done ripping all of these on one side. So I've got my 45 on this side, now I need to spin them around. I'll put the 45 on the other side. One note, whenever I made these stiles and milled them, I'm going for I want to yield a 2-inch wide stile So I actually made these 2 1/8. So I am ripping 1/8 off of the face. I didn't make them the exact 2 inches. That way, if there is any inconsistency, I'm still getting a really nice crisp corner edge, nice and sharp the whole way. So make them a little bit wider than what you actually want. Now I've got all my pieces ripped with 45.5 degrees. I lay them out flat on the table, and now I'm going to use packing tape. I'm still trying different tapes, see what works best, but this is the heavy duty packing tape. It's a little bit thicker. Well, we want to go ahead and just tape this up then. That's nice. That way it looks good. So now it's kind of the tricky part. We've got to flip it over now. So what I like to do is I like to pull it off the edge of the workbench and let it fold down. We're just going to let it fold into the square. I already see some of my tape is coming off on this corner. Sometimes if your wood has the dust on it from sanding, this packing tape doesn't like to stick. Sometimes I use regular painter's tape, but the disadvantage in that is that you can't see through it. So if you've got a gap in your corner, it's a lot harder to tell. So this is a really important step. I'll take a block that matches the inside diameter here and rip it square and put a couple pocket holes on it. And I like to screw that to the inside of the column, and what that does is it helps keep the column squared up. If you don't do that, it's really easy for the column to get wonky as you're assembling it, and then whenever you go to put your crown on it or whatever, it won't be square. Oh, I'm actually putting it on the wrong one. You want to put it on the center. Okay, so now I can go ahead and glue it up. I'm going to use Titebond 3, and the reason is because it's a lot runnier than Titebond 1. In this case, I want it to, I don't want any globs of glue to build up and keep that miter from coming together nice and tight. And the fact that this just is a lot more runny, I find it just works better. Go ahead and hit both sides, both corners. That first tap, helps spread glue out a little bit, and then kind of burn it in with a finger. All right, so now it's ready to fold up. Just throw a little tape on it for now. Now you can see how these blocks help keep it nice and square. We'll go ahead and roll it over and just inspect the corner and make sure there aren't any gaps that need addressed. Actually looks really good the whole way. So now I'll lay out my pieces and do my last one. So I hope this video helped you guys out. Again, this technique is really nice whenever you've just got 1 or 2 columns to do and you don't want to mess around with tooling up a shaper or something like that. I definitely prefer a lock miter on columns because you're guaranteed you're not going to have any exposed fasteners. You know, again, you've got your 3 sides assembled, so the 4th side is installed on site, and you can use tape. Tape and pin nails is good. These are going to be paint grade, so that's not really too big of a deal as far as exposed fasteners go, but works really well for me, and the miter fluid gives really crisp results, and that's why I like doing it. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. It's a video I've been wanting to do for a while because I think it'll help a lot of guys out who do site work or don't have access to tooling like shapers and stuff to do lock miters. But this is a really quick and efficient method. The tools that I use for the stapler and stuff like that, I'll have links to below. Go ahead and check those out. That helps support the channel. This works really great for 1 or 2 columns. With a lock miter, there's more setup time, and therefore your efficiency goes down whenever you're not doing a production level of volume. So hopefully this helps you guys. You got any questions, you can ask below. Check out the links below for the tools that I use. That helps support the channel. And thanks for watching as always, and look forward to the next video.